Hello, Waterford Wesleyan Church Online. My name is Pastor Matt. I'm the assistant pastor here at Waterford Wesleyan Church, and we've got two quick announcements for you this week. And I feel like I am the least qualified person to give these announcements because they're both for women's events. And the first is this Saturday, so that's April 30th, 2022. 5:30 here at the church, we're doing a women's event called Every Mile Mattered, which is a small little conference that our women's director Pam has put together. And what it's going to talk about is that wherever you are in your walk with Christ, wherever you started to wherever you are now, every step in between mattered, and God used it to get you to where you are now, and He is not done with you. So if you're a woman and you want to be able to learn more about that in your walk with Christ, I highly encourage you, again, this Saturday, April 30th, 5:30 here at the church. We just ask that you sign up. So you can either go to waterfordwc.com and register under the Growth Groups tab, or you can text the word MILE, M-I-L-E, to 518-223-8662. We hope to see you there. The next event is this, starting May 2nd, every Monday and Wednesday, up at the pond here in Waterford, we are going to have a what Pam is now calling Soul Sisters Ministry. S-O-L-E, as in the soles of your feet. And that's exactly what it means. What she's basically going to be doing is you're going to be walking 2 miles around the pond, and this is just a time to get to know one another. We're coming out of COVID. Maybe you don't know the people that you're sitting next to in church, or maybe you don't know the people across the aisle in church and you just want to get to know, and you're a woman, you can come to this event. Again, that is every Monday and Wednesday at 6:30 up at the pond for 2 months starting May 2nd. So, with all that out of the way, here's Pastor Paul.
I have spent half my life trying to accomplish one thing, and that one thing is this: trying not to turn into my parents. I think it just kind of happens. And just this week, my wife pointed out to me that I was asking a question. It's about something I already knew the answer to. And she's like, why are you doing that? And I came to realize that's one of my dad's calling cards. Like, he would always ask you questions about things he already knew the answer to. You're like, ugh, why are you doing that? And I vowed I would never do it. And just this week, I did it. Along with a list of other things that I have done that I keep becoming more and more like my parents as time goes on. And as much as you don't want to, it's probably going to happen to you. It's genetic. You can't do anything about it. And in many ways, some of that's okay. I mean, when you think about it, there's a lot of good things that your parents have poured into you. And the reason it keeps coming back to you is because it has some value. But there are other situations in life where maybe some of the things that you're trying not to become, that you look at, not everybody had fantastic parents. Not everybody had a great upbringing. And there's some things that you witnessed in your own life that you're like, I'm definitely not going to become like that. You're like, I cannot let that happen in my life. And we call that like negative examples. Like you say, I'm not going to be this. And I'm going to work really, really hard at not doing this. And I'm not sure what I'm going to become, but at least I know this. I'm not doing that. Okay? And that's kind of what we've been talking about over the course of this last year in many different ways. But today we're going to kind of narrow it down on something very specific, and a very specific negative example of what you don't want to become, especially in a world like we are today. I shared with you in our last video that this world is pretty messed up. I mean, we get that. Just flip through the headlines, flip through your social media feed, and you'll quickly see that this world has got some pretty big problems. And as followers of Jesus, we are going to face opposition. We are going to face resistance. We are going to face people that don't want you to live out your full potential in Jesus. That it's just the way it is. And so when you face those kinds of resistance or obstacles in your life, one of the things that will hold you steady is making sure that you know who you are. And some of that has to do with making sure you know who you are not. And so as we talk about this, I don't want to become like my parents. We say those things, and a lot of times it just has to do with the peculiar idiosyncrasies of life. But there are deeper things that we don't want to become like. And it's not even so much about our parents, but when we're talking about following Jesus, I'm going to show you an example today of someone that you do not want to become like. You may not know where you're moving forward in Jesus, but here I'm going to give you 4 things, 2 of them today, to make sure you are not doing this in your life. So with that in mind, we're going to pop our Bibles open to Matthew, and looking specifically at Matthew chapter 27, beginning at verse 11, and we'll read through 24. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now, it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked them. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." What we just read there is we can see a handful of defects in the character of Pilate. There's some things he just totally drops the ball on. And like I said, we're going to take this as a negative example. This is what you don't want to do. It isn't about not becoming your parents. Don't become like Pilate. It's what we're working on here today. And so what I want you to see here is the issue is this, that Pilate has a problem, and his problem is with his character. But even more than that, it's not just his character, it's with his identity. And we're going to get to that here in just a second. Realize this, the fix is in. The religious leaders have Jesus all lined up. They've plotted against him. They've got him in front of Pilate. And Pilate, Jesus' life hangs in the balance here. And I want you to notice what Pilate says as all of this starts to come to a head right there in front of him. In verse 22, we see an issue with his character. And here we go. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. Now let's just pause there for 1 second. What shall I do? Wait a minute. You're the leader. You're the one that has the authority. You're the one that's in charge. You're the one that calls the shots. You're the one that has life and death in your hands. You have the authority, and Pilate turns to the crowd and says, "What shall I do?" I mean, you could say, well, it's customary for them to release somebody. Don't you see what's happening here? Pilate can deal with all of this and just go, "I don't want to hear it anymore," and shut them all out and do what he wants to do. But he is the one in authority, and he's asking the crowd, "What shall I do then?" Are you kidding me, man? That's your job. This is your responsibility. Not only is this a failure of leadership, we see that. What shall I do with Jesus called the Messiah? Well, that's your job, man. You need to figure that out. It's not just a failure of leadership, but then it reveals his character. The problem with his character is he doesn't stand for or anything. Look, here's the thing. Conflict and adversity is going to come, and it's come right now today if we're Pilate, and he totally folds up. He won't stand. John Maxwell, the leadership expert, says specifically about Pilate right here, it says that conflict just paralyzed him. What shall I do? He didn't know what to do. And the reason is because not only does he have poor leadership, he has poor leadership because he has poor character, and he has poor character because he doesn't know who he is. This is ultimately an identity issue. He doesn't know what to stand for. It's a character identity issue. He's moved by whatever's expedient. And I'm telling you, don't become like Pilate, who has, no leadership, poor character, and the reason he has poor character is it's an identity issue. You see, this forces me then to ask the question. If my goal is to not become like Pilate, then I have to look at myself, and you have to look at yourself and ask, do you know who you are? Are you secure in who you are? Do you know who you are? What is your identity? I mean, do I have the character to stand in the face of adversity? Because it's going to come my way. It's going to come your way, especially as followers of Jesus in a world that is moving against him. So it's not so much about what is your character? I want to ask the question that's below that. Do you know who you are? Do you know what your identity is? Is your identity rooted in what? Is it in what you do? Is it in your title? Is it in what you have? I mean, how do you know who you are? What do you build your life upon? Especially when a crisis or a conflict comes, it kind of reveals that, as you're seeing it happen here in Pilate's life. And the same is going to happen to you. You will find out who you are when crisis and conflict comes. So what do you build your life on? What is your identity built on? That's really the question. Because all of those things that Pilate was leaning on became insufficient. Whether it is what your title or what you have or the possessions you have, the money you have, it will all fade and count for nothing when crisis comes. I mean, realize this. that Pilate's title isn't even his identity. He has all of the authority of Rome behind him, and he still folds up like a cheap suit when he says, "What shall I do?" That's your job. Your title, what you have, your authority, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know your identity, fades into nothing. Now, on the other hand, that's the negative example. Don't become like Pilate. But on the other hand, we can take a quick peek at what we should do. At least we have something to shoot for. And someone that does hold himself strong in difficult situations when opposition is against him is the Apostle Paul. And I want you to hear what he says in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." What Pilate missed that Paul got is this. The Apostle Paul understood that his life was no longer his, that the power of Christ lives in him, and he's placed his hope and his faith in a loving God. That's his identity. That's where it's rooted. And he faced all kinds of opposition in this world, where Pilate has the authority of Rome, has the title, has everything else you would think he needs, and he folds up like a cheap suit over one little thing. What shall I do? But not the Apostle Paul. Faced all kinds of adversity without those worldly authorities and titles, and yet he held strong because he built his hope and his faith in Christ, and he built his life on a loving God. That's what separates the two. Don't become like Pilate. That's your goal, my goal, as we look at that negative example. But we're not just done there. There's another thing that I want to point out to you here today, is in a way to not become like Pilate. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like an outpouring of the identity issue. When you don't know who you are, this is what you're going to start to see. And it has to do with decision making. Don't assume that the difficult right decision will bring immediate success. Actually, the right decision may cause more problems. So making the right decision. Let's take a look at verses 23 and 24. When they demanded that Jesus be crucified, Pilate responds this way. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." Now, again, I will remind you, Pilate has all of the authority. Pilate has all of the say, and yet he folds up. He can overrule everyone there and just say, well, this is the way it's going to be. And you can see that Pilate is trying to release Jesus. He knows that's the right thing to do, but yet he just can't stand. He's getting nowhere. And the people are not going to be happy with him making what we would view as the right decision, to let the innocent man go. The people aren't going to like that. And Scripture is very clear because it says an uproar is about to start. And Pilate folds up. Making the right decision for Pilate would have caused him more problems. And so this is coming out of that identity issue. Don't assume making the right decision is going to bring you sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes it makes life harder, but you still must make the right decision. The right decision for Pilate would have resulted in no immediate positive results for Pilate. And so that's one of the reasons he didn't make it. It was not going to get easier. Matter of fact, it was going to get messier for Pilate if he did what was right. That uproar was starting, and he didn't want to deal with it. So he did what was easy and expedient. Don't become like Pilate. Now, there will come a day, or maybe that day is for you right now, where you have to do the right thing, where you have to stand for the right reason, to hold to your principles in the face of opposition or even straight out defiance and resistance. And that decision that you're going to make needs to be made to do the right thing, not by what's expedient, not by what's easy, not by what appears to be going to give you immediate, easy results. That's not how we make decisions. That decision must be made by doing what is right. And the only way you can stand and do what's right, especially when it's difficult, is know who you are. Back to the identity issue. Not what produces immediate relief. And that's easier said than done. And to prove to you that it's easier said than done, Pilate couldn't do it. And he had all the worldly authority and power he needed, and he still folded up. So for you and me, we again have to build our life on something other than this world, and that is namely Jesus Christ. So, Pilate couldn't do it. It's not that easy. And for us today, in 2022, especially as American citizens, one of the things that gets in our way is pragmatism. Our country's almost rooted in some way of pragmatism, of saying, hey, if it makes logical sense to do it this way, that's the way we do it. And in many ways, that has value, no doubt. But not necessarily in the kingdom. Now remember, Paul said this in Galatians, that his life is rooted in faith, and faith is not always pragmatic. That is for sure. And what is pragmatism? It's focusing or solving problems with practical solutions to those problems. But you and I know that faith doesn't always work that way. I mean, let's go back to Jesus right here with Pilate. Not defending himself in front of Pilate and being crucified? Well, that doesn't seem too practical. It doesn't seem too practical to me for James and John to leave the family business of fishing to go follow Jesus. They could have had an easy life. It's not too practical to me to be martyred like Stephen, who just allowed that to happen in his life. That doesn't seem too practical. It's not too practical to me, is my understanding, to pray for those that are treating you poorly. It's not too practical for you to love those that are treating you terribly. It's not too practical, and you get where I'm going here. So it's very simply put, following Jesus isn't practical. We make decisions then, understand this, by faith, not by ease. When you know who you are and you know to whom you belong, then you can make those right decisions, even though it may not bring you immediate results, and it may not bring you immediate relief, and it doesn't make life all sunshine and rainbows. This is what it means to follow Jesus in a difficult world. The negative example is don't be like Pilate. Don't make decisions by whatever is easiest. Build your identity on Christ. Do what's right, not because it's easy, but because it's right. This world is messed up. You understand that, I understand that. And in many ways, there's opposition to you and to me as followers of Christ. And you will face adversity for following Jesus, whether it's at home or whether it's at work or whether it's at school or on your softball team or your bowling team, whatever it may be, you are going to face adversity. Don't become like Pilate. Discover who you are. Root your identity in Jesus, which will enable you to stand when life gets difficult. And the decisions that you make in this life, you don't make them by what's easy or what's expedient or what you think is going to give you immediate results. You make that decision by doing what is right. You are crucified with Christ. You no longer live, but the power of Christ lives in you. And so today, live by the power of the one living in you.